Zoom is changing its tune on plans for AI integration after previously switching up its terms of service to allow the company to use customer video calls to train its generative AI models. For more on the state of generative AI integration, we're joined by Bob O'Donnell, Technalysis Research President and Chief Analyst. Bob, great to speak with you as always here. When you think about some of the moves that are now needing to be disclosed, the different kind of standard operating procedures that we could see changed as a result of a lot of companies' ambitions around generative AI. Where does Zoom's ranked? How do you kind of look at the rest of the picture here? And what does that mean for customers on the other side?
Well, here's the thing, Brad. I mean, everybody is concerned about the usage of generative AI. In fact, I just did a big study on generative AI. And one of the questions I asked about was disclosure of generative AI. When we're using it for things like creating content, it's typically called watermarking. And there's a huge percentage of people, 90% of the companies I surveyed were doing some kind of watermarking for content. You apply that same principle to video, that's another form of content, and people are going to want to know what's being done, how is this being created? And in the case of other concerns that companies had, it was around the loss of copyright. And Zoom's recording of your meetings is clearly a fear of loss of copyright, because if you're having a meeting and you're discussing company plans and new products and all these kinds of ideas, and then all of a sudden that information is included in what Zoom is doing, that's a huge problem for companies. And that's one of the main factors why the few percentage of companies who are not yet using Gen AI aren't doing so.
Yeah, I feel like, hey, Bob, it's Julie here. I feel like the Hollywood strikes have really highlighted this issue as well, right? The use of people's likenesses either being used again or being used to train AI in some way, speech, natural speech, and things of that nature. And that is really again, the study that you talk about that you did, I'm just looking at those results here, the top 10 concerns. I mean, a lot of the concerns are bound up with what we're talking about, whether it's security and data projections or the watermarking issue, trust as a sort of amorphous but important issue. I guess then the question is, how do you solve this stuff?
Well, it's a serious problem. And, one of the issues that came clear in doing this study is there's a couple of interesting things about Gen AI that's unlike any other technology that we've seen widely adopted. One of them is the fact that 95% of the people that were surveyed said, yeah, they expect it to have some kind of impact on their business. So there's this overwhelming sense of we've got to get involved. And yet there were more concerns raised about this technology, as you guys just showed on that chart, than you see with any other technology. In past times, if you had a technology like this where, you think it's cool, but there's so many uncertainties, people would just say, you know what, I'll hold off. Now, with Gen AI, everybody feels like, oh, I got to get in on this. So we have this very weird dichotomy going on between companies who feel they have to be involved and yet are still concerned about it. So that, I say, makes it incumbent upon the vendors who are creating these solutions, the OpenAIs, the Microsofts, the Facebook Metas, Googles, all of these companies are really going to have to go out of their way to really explain, hey, this is what we're doing to avoid these concerns. And there's a staggering lack of education on this. That was the other thing that came out of this survey, was that there's a lot of confusion. Because again, with Gen AI, one of the things that's interesting, when we talk about, office productivity or CRM and all these big applications we've always had over the years that have a big influence on companies, we tend to talk about the application itself. When it's Gen AI, you have to talk about both these foundation models, which is sort of the engine behind the application, and then the application. And then theoretically, you could replace the engine, but keep the application the same, or keep the same engine across multiple applications. So there's so many permutations available out there that, again, it's created a ton of confusion. So bottom line is education, and then a real clarification of exactly what companies are doing is, I think, the only way to address some of those concerns.
Bob, one of the conclusions or recommendations that also came out of this study or the survey after was that there are early wins in productivity and content creation, but opportunities in software and CRM as well. Are there software CRM companies that you look at as leaders in generative AI right now?
Well, in terms of CRM, obviously you got to look at Salesforce. They're doing a lot there. Microsoft also is doing a lot in terms of CRM, and they're bringing Gen AI into all of these things. And the software stuff specifically was around coding. And so we're seeing coding tools being developed again. You've got Microsoft doing that. You've got Amazon starting to talk about some of the Gen AI coding tools they're doing. Google as well, right? So all the big platform companies are clearly big players here. And that was another interesting thing from the study is it is indeed the big guys that I think are going to get bigger here. There's a lot of work being done by smaller companies, and I think it's interesting and exciting, but I think it is going to be a bit of a challenge for some of them to break through at a high level, except with one exception, that is very industry-specific solutions, because there's a huge demand. If you're in a very specific industry, the big companies may not have something that matches your needs. That's where we're going to see a lot of interesting opportunity, I think, from startups and other companies working to get into the Gen AI buzz.
Just to circle back to this issue of what people currently want from their generative AI that they're not getting, again, to emphasize what you were talking about before, watermarking is the missing capability that it seems like folks want the most. You said, and you said that the companies are going to have to hear them on that, but are they actually, are they moving quickly to address that, to actually come out with watermarking?
Well, look, they're all really moving quickly, right? Let's think about it. January of this year, hardly any of us had even heard of this stuff, right? Here we are, it's only August, and already 88% of companies are using Gen AI. That was another data point from the study. It's gone mainstream. So I think what you're seeing is very rapid evolution. And I think this fall, when we start to see, I'm guessing is when we're going to start seeing some of the office productivity suites. Microsoft has already announced they're going to do Office with Gen AI. Google's doing that with Workspace. Those are going to have a huge impact. And then we're going to start to see other developments. We're going to see people integrate watermarking, especially, I think, in those office productivity suites, where if you generate something and put it into a Word doc or a Docs doc, it's going to notify people. So that's going to help on the watermarking side. The other big thing people are worried about is prompt training. We all have to learn how to write prompts now for Gen AI. And integrating that training into the tools is another big capability that people are really requesting. So to answer your point specifically, Julie, I think they are working on them. These things do take a while, but my guess is by the end of the year, you're going to see a ton of features around watermarking, integrated prompt training, and some of these other capabilities.
Even at the core of that watermarking, though, it all comes back to trust. And just because a company is large and a mega cap tech giant that has billions of dollars to deploy towards their research and development around generative AI to either purchase or invest in another company or to build something internally and home grow it and then bring it to their client base, does that all mean that they could, are, or should be trusted? And what is perhaps the trust mechanism that customers should be looking for when they are tapping into one of the different generative AI language learning models, or even a chipset that's best for them to deploy as well?
No, it's a great question, Brad. And one of the things I did also in the study is looked at the factors that would determine why I would work with a particular company for each of the 10 largest companies that are involved with LLMs. And one of the factors was trust. And it was very interesting to see where that trust scale landed for each of the different companies. Interestingly, Google was at the top in terms of trust, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. But the other companies were very close. The point is, there's a lot of work being done. And again, I think it really is going to boil down, I hate to sound like a broken record, but that education capability, explaining exactly what it is that they're going to do, how you can leverage your data. How do I take all this stuff that I've been promised? This is, at the end of the day, this is sort of analytics version 4, right? Big data version 4. Finally, we're getting able to really harness insights from our data using Gen AI. I mean, that's one of the big capabilities of it. So explaining how that's going to work and explaining how the tools create content, how they notify people that indeed this was created by Gen AI. Of course, there'll be a whole ethical discussion as well as should companies do that or shouldn't they? And of course, I think they should, but will they? There's going to be a lot of questions there. But at the end of the day, Brad, I mean, trust takes a long time, right? That's not something you earn overnight. Companies also have to know how to integrate this with their existing tools. That's another factor that's going to be critical. How do I take what I already have, then integrate this new stuff? And so that's why, again, the bigger guys, I think, have an advantage here because most of their stuff is already installed in these organizations. So it feels like it's going to be a little bit easier to integrate with what they have.
Bob, good to see you. Really interesting study. Thanks for this. Bob O'Donnell,
Thanks,
Technalysis
Julie.
Research President and Chief Analyst. Appreciate it.